Alrighty.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Ukrainian researcher Darya Tsymbalyuk. She's here to discuss her new book, Ecocide in Ukraine, The Environmental Cost of Russia's War, which is an intimate portrait of her beloved homeland against the backdrop of Russia's war and ecocide. Darya will be in conversation with Monica Effinger, a professor of law and professor of anthropology at St. Louis University. Give it up for Monica. And my name is Elena. I'm a bookseller here at the Left Bank, and I'm your host this evening. So I have a couple notes before we get started. Let's see. So today's event is possible because of your support. When you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into the local economy, which funds your streets, parks, libraries, and more. It also helps writers get the support they deserve and allows us to produce events such as this. So once again, thank you all for coming and supporting this event. Us at Left Bank, we are always working to plan new events for readers of all ages. So we do have an event coming up this Sunday, September 14th at 6 p.m., which will be a live recording of the podcast episode for Maxie's World, which will feature a discussion between local activist, philosopher, and artist Maxie Glamour, Rachel M. Brown, who is a researcher and author of the book Unsettled Laborers, Migrant Care Work in Palestine and Israel, and John Boom Kwan, who is a professor of cultural anthropology at Webster University. So yeah, go check it out. It's free to attend. Be a good one. It's gonna be a good discussion. Yep, and you can visit our website, left-bank.com, for a list of all the events we have. And so I'm just gonna give a little introduction for both of our speakers tonight. Darya is an assistant professor at the Department of Slavic Languages and Literatures at the University of Chicago. Academic papers and public essays explore narratives about environments, multi-species worlds, displacement, embodied knowledge, and entangled colonial histories of Ukraine. Her writing has appeared on the BBC's Future Planet and Open Democracy websites, among many other publications. In addition to her research and writing, Darya also works with images through drawing, painting, collage, and video essays, which I would like to see. And then a little intro from Monica, who is an anthropologist of law whose research focuses on the pragmatics of inclusion, exclusion, and governance. Her first career was in diplomacy, and in 1999, she received an Individual Superior Honor Award, the State Department's highest civilian honor. Wow. She then in 2001, it's like, what a note. You're like, yeah, I got this. Congratulations. And in 2001, she left the Foreign Service to take up questions that this policy work had raised her for. And since 2010, she has been a professor of law and professor of anthropology at St. Louis University. Everybody give a warm welcome to our two speakers.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for such a warm welcome. Right. So I can add my introduction of Darya. Darya is a fan of mounds, like Cahokia. Mounds in Ukraine. So Korhani. So she's a fan of Korhani and Chain of Rocks Bridge. The rapids. The rapids also had ones. Yes, in Ukraine there were famous rapids that were sort of a place that was definitional of a kind of historical touchstone in Ukrainian kind of political imagination. The Cossacks of beyond the rapids, the Polynesian speech. So we've tested out this hypothesis, and we know that she also appreciates the Korhani of our region and the rapids here as well. Yeah. St. Louis is amazing. Yeah. Yes. Maybe you could tell us some about just a little introduction to the book, a little introduction to the project or why ecology, and maybe also a little bit about your own personal, your how you situate yourself within the social or geographical space of Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for coming. This book was written very, very quickly, and we've been talking about it this morning in the past couple of days. But I really kind of think of a lot of my work as urgent work, and work that the main ingredient is urgency, right? Because you work in the context of the war. And I came to academia actually through a participatory art project working with people displaced from Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, the east of Ukraine, at the start of the war in 2014. And I did participatory art because I really wanted to make an intervention into the public space of Ukraine to build conversations, because there was a lot of, even though they say Ukrainians move into other regions in Ukraine, there was a lot of prejudice, marginalization. And so we kind of tried to build this conversation, and participatory art felt like the most natural way of engaging. And then I ended up going for masters and somehow keep going to academia. But I think my writing form, and this book is also part of that thinking, is always trying to communicate to audiences beyond. And also intervene, like I see it as a gesture of intervention into the discussion, right? And I understand how imperfect it is, and I don't actually aim to make anything perfect in that time. And there's, it's just a strange state to be writing something urgently, but my intention was just kind of keep the conversation going, right? To have the conversations that we have with you, with people everywhere I go, and think with them about the impact of the war on environments and why environments, because we are, like Shane was speaking, we are ecological. I mean, we are ecological in all senses. We are embedded into ecologies. We are multi-species within us because we consist of the microbiome, right? We are embedded, in the environment, literally. And the war, I think of the war as the assault on worlds, on the multiplicity of the worlds in which we are in, and in that sense, environment is not something outside of you, right? This is part of that reality deeply in every instance, but also it's something that actually people who are displaced brought into their testimonies, because originally when I started interviewing people in 2015, they talked, we talked about home cities, about homes, and environments were like, it wasn't on my point of interest, but people talked about particular grasses, particular trees that they miss, gardens, and they're the ones who signaled to me, having this experience of war and displacement, that this is what matters, right? And that's kind of how they really taught me to pay attention.
Yeah. When we talk about displacement, we're talking about since 2014, since the invasion of Crimea and southern Ukraine, the provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk, and the internal displacement that started then, and then with the full-scale invasion that started in 2022. And also, you may know more recent figures, but the last estimate that I had read was at least 12 million people in Ukraine that are internally displaced, so they are away from the place where they consider home, and they're living in it. They had to flee for their lives. And there's 8 million people who had to flee the country, 8 million more. So there's something like 20 million people out of a total population of perhaps 35 million that are displaced. So what does it mean to be displaced? And it sounds like when you were asking people this question, what is home, then the environment was one of the touchstones for people.
And I think it's also because Ukraine is actually, it sounds funny to say it in the US, but Ukraine is quite a big country. It's when I took a train from Chicago and I arrived here, I was covering half Ukraine, but I'm still in the same state. But Ukraine actually has different climate zones, and the one thing that the war which begins in the east of the country also used to be the most industrial part of Ukraine, and because it was most industrial, it's most densely populated. It's a coal mining steel region where, as in many other industrial regions in the world, the cities kind of merged into each other, into this massive agglomerations. And so the frontline really cut among through the most densely populated areas. So you got already millions of people moving out in 2014, and as any state, it's also the perfect response to accommodate them. But I think it also has to do with this with the change in the environment. And I had, for example, interviewed one of the people, a man called Oleg, who worked for the forest industry in the very west of Ukraine, in Lviv. So he moved around about like more than 1,000 kilometers, which is what, like 900 miles, 600 miles is beyond my understanding. But he moved like all across the country, and he was telling me he used to go at his job. He used to go to the nettle and get bitten by the nettle, and
It's nettles like the plant.
the plants. Yeah, exactly. And his coworkers were like, "What are you doing? Why? Like, what's wrong with you?" And he's like, "I don't know what it is. Like, I don't recognize it. Right? It was a different variety of nettle, and he didn't right. There's different species." Which is of course very common in the US. We have so many different climates, but even for Ukraine, like, people talked about that experience of the new environment and like not knowing it. So
Being displaced and getting stung by stinging nettles because you didn't recognize a nettle as a nettle, even though you're a forester.
of course, yeah, and that's also kind of, I guess, a metaphor for migration and displacement, right? For the environment around you being not fully welcoming,
Not fully known and not fully familiar.
not fully familiar, and being a sense of danger. Yeah.
So, would you like to read a little bit from the book, or is there anything that you would like to read?
Oh, what do you think is a good?
So, I have a couple of things.
I'll
Like,
trust you with the
I'll pick one and then I'll ask maybe for your response.
right? Yeah.
Okay. So Darya is from a city of. Can I just talk about the Dnipro in Mississippi?
Yes, please. And I can talk about the South.
Okay, so Dnipro, so Ukraine is roughly oval shaped. It's like an egg on its side. Yeah. Ah. 180. We're borrowing an atlas from the thing books.
Don't steal it, but buy it.
So Ukraine, if Ukraine is shaped, it's wider than it is north to south, it's wider east to west, and there's a there we are. You know which. So there's a river that divides the country north to south. The river is called the Dnipro River, and symbolically or in imagination, I think of it as the closest equivalent that I've experienced in any other part of the world to the Mississippi River, and the place the Mississippi River has in the United States, dividing the country east and west, and being this major artery, being a transportation source, being a source of water for irrigation, but also, as we know, being in the flyway, meaning something to the natural world around us that navigates by the Mississippi, navigates by the Dnipro. So Darya comes from the city Mykolaiv, which is on the Dnipro, on the Liman, but in the south, in the next by water, in the estuary, in the southern third, like 3/4 of the way down you pick, so southern part of Ukraine, but not the sea, not the very bottom of the coast on the Black Sea, but the North Sea. Okay, so.
But it's, Dnipro is also, I mean, it's important for the national imagination, but like, we were also talking yesterday how Mississippi was a border zone, right, of freedom and unfreedom. And unfortunately in Ukraine now, especially in the parts of some parts which are occupied, and Zaporizhia, it matters where you're on the left bank or the right bank. So if you're, on either Russian occupation or not, and for many people who have been crossing and fleeing across the river has really also been symbolic and
Both real and
real material. Yeah. Crossing to the other side.
So when I look at the giant map of Ukraine in the corridor of our apartment in Mykolaiv, the map I mostly study these days to locate villages and towns that were shelled the night before, all rivers, all water seem to be flowing south to the Black and the Azov seas. Like the palms of two hands, the seas are holding the cartographic image of Ukraine. The south for me is this openness of space, unfolding towards the water. the kind of openness that makes the windy air in my home village of Velika Korenica taste like apples, sweet and nourishing. Once upon a time, there were vast grasslands of the steppe in the south, which were exhaustively plowed and replaced by monocrop agricultural fields. The plains are arid, but at some points in the south, they meet the water plains, the seas. Following the trembling shoreline of the encounter between land and water on the map, I trace fickle limans and sandy spits charged with intense life.
Yeah. So coming from the south, which is a steppe, kind of prairie, dry region, but also a region that meets the water, the Black Sea and all the estuaries, which are very important as places of refuge for all kind of wildlife, predominantly birds. It's also interesting to think of the numbers. The statistics says that 8 million birds fly over Ukraine each year down south, and if you think of the 8 million refugees also that exited, I mean, it's kind of strange coincidences. Yeah,
This photograph is not fake, right?
no, it's
fake.
staged. It's real. It's actually from my home region. The storks returning, but the south is a lot about this kind of very dry, prairie-like climate and the importance of rivers and waters. And I come from the city, which used to be a shipbuilding city, which was built actually it's the same year as Chicago, probably also close to like the founding of St. Louis, was built when Russia colonizes the south of Ukraine imperially to build ships then to go into the Black Sea. So water really is important, I mean, military-wise, but also it's important for people who live there in terms of fishing and local imagination. And I really grew up kind of like here where the two rivers meet, which is a magical, it's quite magical to think about that the two rivers could meet and become something else. But as I was writing this book, I mean, it's very much situated in the south, and part of it is honesty, it's the place I know, and part of it is willing to talk about Ukraine as a place of home and being able to share it at a place which is a home, because like with any other place that is under attack now, Ukraine becomes flattened into this kind of geopolitical abstraction, and you only see it through, rightfully so, through atrocities day after day. But of course, the ones those of us who are from there or have very close ties of being there, they also know it as a living place, and that's something that I also wanted to articulate and at least preserve. And rising from that space of home and love, I think was really important for me also to articulate that.
So I'd like to ask you about, Darya already told me this is not a fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. She talks about species, different species. So can you name your favorite species in the book and how you talk about it?
Yeah, I like choosing something favorite is always difficult, right? But the book has a lot of species, and it was also part of my thinking of, as I mentioned, thinking of Ukraine as a living world or as a multiplicity of living worlds which are populated by different species, not only human species. Thinking of how can I write them into the fabric of the text? How can I make them actors and victims of the war? And sometimes we also, I mean, many of you probably know the term of charismatic species, right? That we tend to pay more attention to dolphins and bears and pandas because they're like cute and they're relative to the size of the animal. And it's difficult to, we don't know, we don't even know about the existence of many insects or sometimes like fish and other species. And so one of the challenges I kind of set for myself, I tried to see, because there's a lot of conversation about the dolphins. I mean, the president talks about the dolphins, everybody talks about the dolphins, and they're definitely impacted. And I have a story about the dolphins, a very dramatic story about the dolphins. I can read that. but I was also interested in thinking of other species that perhaps don't get attention, like ants, or I was very interested in earthworms, but there is no research at all, not even beyond Ukraine. How does the war impact earthworms and other, the multiplicity of lives that we don't even think about? I think there is an awareness in Ukraine because of this moment of crisis, and I call it in the book the episteme of death. Like in the moment of destruction, you actually learn about the existence of some things, and there there's a period of initiatives talking about extinction. So it's coming up, but it's also very sad because it's conditioned by the act of losing. Like everywhere else, like the question about extinction, right? We start to kind of, oh my God, let's disappear and let's do something. Let's mobilize. Let's talk about it at least. Let's write about it. But I think a lot about the disappearance.
Remind me how many endangered species are in the Red Book in Ukraine,
There's so many.
or is the subset that's threatened by the war? Darya talks about some species that are specifically located in places where the combat is going on.
Yeah, so in the beginning of 2022, the Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group, which is an amazing initiative, it's an NGO of environmentalists and scholars on the ground. I was also encouraged to donate to them because they are the people who actually, try to help the environment, but also environmentalists, because environmentalists are targeted and they lose homes and, they're endangered and they also need to be supported. But they published a list of 20 species on the brink of extinction, and they were all plants, steppe plants, prairie plants, which is the region I come from. And I looked at this list and I realized I have never seen any of these plants. I mean, because they're already endangered, right? And you have to go to specific places to find them. And it was so sad because it was this dry list with Latin names and Ukrainian names. I mean, there were a number of knapweed, which is knapweed. Yeah, but like I didn't know specificities, and I started looking them up. And the next level of sadness is that you get maximum from the Red Book of Endangered Species. You get like a very dry botanical paragraph. If there are any botanists, huge respect, but also like as a humanities, I'm like, okay, like it's how tall is the plant and whatever the seeds form, but it's not really it doesn't give you a lot, and in Ukraine actually weirdly, if you know, please let me know, but I haven't we don't actually have a lot of botanical books like in Western Europe and other colonial places when plants were studied. They don't really exist. We don't also have too many about this very specifically endangered plants. We don't have any indigenous or native knowledge or folk knowledge, because I was hoping maybe there's some songs, there's something. I couldn't find anything, and I still felt so sad that even the species are disappearing, and all we have on them is like very specific description of how tall they are. And so I kind of tried to pull them out somehow, and I ended up with encountering one of the plants in real life, which was very, very special, which was with a group of environmentalists and with a botanist. And we went to a field where there are only two places on Earth where this plant grows, and we went to this field, but because it's Ukraine and the field was part of fighting, and so it wasn't demined, we were told not to step into the grass. And then when you have a botanist in front of the reservation or the reserve field, it's like they cannot stay on the asphalt. So
They can't help themselves.
They can't help themselves. And this botanist just walked into the field, and we were standing on the asphalt, and we were like, come back, don't walk, we don't know what's in the grass. And he kept on walking, trying to find this particular plant species, and he found it. But it was so special. I don't even know how to describe that feeling when you witness this plant that is about to disappear. And actually, weirdly, maybe now a bit more protected, because if the field is mined, people will not go there. We don't know, but
there may be some unintended consequences.
Yeah, there's many unintended consequences.
Yeah. So one thing that I learned from Darya's book is that people who study soil have created a specific word to describe soil that was disturbed by explosions or by bombing.
Bombardation.
Yeah, bombardation, which then disrupts plant species, insect species. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the soil or the land, if there's.
Yeah, it was a challenge to write about the land. I mean, I feel like the question of the land gets tangled up in so many different political imaginations, and really quickly appropriated by also national imaginations. and territory, the question of territory and kind of mapping, and with Ukraine, like people react very painfully, rightfully so, when speaking about concessions, or because we're not talking about just points on the map, we're talking about places where your grandmother lived, and it's really all of that is, it's really painful to even be being asked this question about concessions, I think, in Ukraine. But what was important for me is kind of to think, and how do we understand land beyond what we know from geopolitics or from the nation state, national imagination? Because most people don't actually relate to it through those lenses, right? They relate to it somehow else, and that's the reason why I stay. There are literally people who stayed under occupation because they were waiting for their tomatoes to range, right? Or I know somebody who didn't want to leave her orchids, and these are the motivations quite often that drive people to remain on contaminated land, to return to Chernobyl, and live there. And in Ukrainian there is a word zemlya, which means both land and soil, and territory and earth. So there's kind of multiplicity of this thinking of the land, and I was trying to kind of untangle and at the same time to keep this multiplicity and relation to the land, which goes beyond the kind of expectations that we have. I think in Ukraine, and then of course now the land is so much linked to trenches and going digging into the land, and that experience of the war and graves, mass graves, burial. So it has this other layer of relating of what land is. Yeah.
Darya's organized the book in a really interesting way. So there's a chapter on Zemlya, on land. There's a chapter on plants. There's a chapter on water. A chapter on air, and about the natural qualities, about the natural environment as described by botanists or soil experts, but also as experienced by people during the war, and there are some places, and she warns us in the beginning of the book, that these are not discrete, siloed categories of experience, and so there are places where there's overlapping or where they seep into each other. And so I think it's in the chapter on bodies that she revisits land, about bodies becoming part of the land again because of mass graves, because of these combat zones. I would like to ask you to tell the story of this relatively rare polecat. The polecat, and then maybe we can open up for questions, because I'm sure people have questions.
Should I go with the polecat or with the dolphin?
Oh, do you guys want to? So, and the polecat kind of looks a little bit like a cross between like a skunk and a raccoon.
Incredible.
Why not Castle?
So, do you want polecat and dolphin?
Yeah.
Let's go. Charismatic megaphone.
I think the polecat is an endemic species to Ukraine, to the east of Ukraine, also south of Russia. Even in Latin, so Ukrainian name for Perahuzne, and then the last name has Perahuzne in it, so it's really is from there. I've never seen it until the war, as many other species, and that's for me this epitome of death, the sadness of me learning about these places and the species and people and cities just because they're getting annihilated. But I learned about it first time because there was a video circulating of soldiers and their trench, and this polecat animal, which has a very particular muzzle. It's like black and white, and it's very cute for humans for sure. and it's very striking. And it got trapped in a trench, which a lot of animals do, and
fell in
and it was panicking. It was running around and announcing that that's not cool where I am. And the soldiers, they've never seen something like this, and they were like, "Oh my God, what is that? What is this animal?" And they're trying to rescue it, and so they eventually managed to release it, and they're laughing. And then I saw other videos of this polecat. There's another soldier who actually adopted a baby polecat because it was abandoned. It's called marble polecat actually, and the full title. And was nourishing this polecat and was posting these videos of TikTok of this marble polecat, and then him hanging out. But it's really about the encounters with these animals, both through media, kind of recent encounters, but also in real life. A lot of these people, they didn't know the species existed, and the soldier who adopted one ended up anyway popularizing the existence of the species. Because people would write like who's that? Like what, we've never seen it, and so they kind of learned that they're endemic, they're endangered. It's a kind of strange also outcome of this war. But the story I like to tell is about the dolphin because
Can I add actually the polecat story, something that's like significant about the war in Ukraine is almost, the army is now professionalizing, but almost the entire military force is volunteer civilians or civilians who've been mobilized. They're not professional military guys. So, and some of them volunteered from the beginning of the war, some of them volunteered since, or the beginning of the full-scale invasion, some of them volunteered since then, but most of them, once you have volunteered or been mobilized, if you're at the front, there's not a system yet of demobilizing.
Yeah.
So people who volunteered in February of 2022 are still in trenches at the front. So this experience of camping in a trench for some guys who grew up as scouts and guys or girls who grew up as scouts and have experience in like wilderness camping experience, but for other people, they either grew up on farms or villages and they grew up around livestock, but not around polecats. Or some people, they're IT guys or they're, women who worked in an insurance company or whatever, and they volunteered and gone to the front or been mobilized. And they're on this extended, yes, they're also, it's lethal and it's combat and it's all of those things, but they're also on this extended encounter with this wild space in this most of the time, non-urban or non-village experience. So they're living in trenches and which polecat falls and this endangered species that most of them, they couldn't identify it. And if you imagine that if you ran into something that looked like the cross between a skunk and a raccoon for the first time, then it's this astonishing encounter. And these guys take such care. These videos circulate in part because it's so effective, right? These guys take such care. They put down a piece of plastic, like a plastic, it's like this wide. It's like not quite a tarp, but this rigid plastic to try to help the polecat climb out. And it's scrambling, it can't get it. And they're thinking from the mindset of a polecat, what could a polecat do? What would it? So they drop their knapsack into the trench to create something the polecat can jump onto to make it high enough that it can jump out. So these experiences that people are encountering and this episteme of death that people are learning about the polecat right before it goes extinct, because they're in this crazy situation that you would never have prepared yourself for an adult life to, you don't think, oh, I'm gonna grow up and then go stay in a trench for 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, there's this there's this other soldier I read about the which is a Ukraine, right? And he tweeted about these two stories. So one of them, a crowd befriended him, and he ended up taking care of the crowd. But then at some point he started tweeting because he said he went outside to pee in the front line, like went outside, and a bat crashed into him. And at first he was like, "What's going on?" And then he saw it's bad, and he's like, and the bat was, from this crash, suffered. And so, okay, he picked up this bat, and we have only one bat rehabilitation center in Ukraine, and all Ukrainian bats are endangered. I mean, he had all this, but he found this rehabilitation center, which is in Kharkiv, which is a city 30 kilometers, which is like 30 miles away from Russia, which is constantly bombed, but one of the most incredible cities in Ukraine. He wrote to them and said, "Guys, I have this bat, I'm on the front line, come and get it." And they're like, "Where are you located?" And he's like, "Really?" And they're like, "No, we're not going there. We can't go there. It's so dangerous. But we'll send you a kit how to take care of the bats. We have this kit that we send to people. So they sent him a kit, which apparently included a toothbrush, because bat really likes when you brush." Like all those videos when you brush their hair. And so he got all this kit and also like bat food and tweezers to feed the bat. And he was tweeting about this bat and learning how to take care of the bat. And at some point, the bat has to go sleep in the fridge. What was it? Hibernation. So he also had a container to put the bat, and he was tweeting, and he became this sensation of Ukrainian meat. And everybody's like, "What's following? What's going on with this bat? What's the next step?" Then the bat went into hibernation, and the bat was eventually released in Kyiv. And it was like a public event. People came to the park and were watching the release of the bat. And one of the tweets, he said like people always ask me like what's wrong with you? Why are you like bothering with the crowd? And then like this is so much trouble. And he said that they're also victims like us, right? We share this catastrophe, and so they were not, they were not. It's not their fault that what happens to them. And so and that's very much thinking of hopefully. I mean, I don't want to romanticize it because if you talk to environmentalists and if you ask them the same thing about the environment change, they'll be like, but worse. But worse because the law, like the lobby is very strong, extractivism is proliferated during the war, it's much easier to do any kind of logging, extraction of minerals, whom do I have to tell in this country, all of that is intensified. So the environment is like, it's awful now, it's worse than it was before. But as a humanities, I do find a little bit of glimpse of hope in this kind of experiences of sharing and the stories, and hopefully maybe, that's what brings us into the future somehow, that we will learn to respect that more, to be inspired together with them. Somehow, yeah. And how about dolphins? The dolphins, they are, well, I should know that exactly, but there are two types of dolphins in one purpose in the Black Sea, and they're also endangered. And in the beginning of 2022, there was the Black Sea is really it's intensely militarized. The Azov Sea is basically occupied, but you have Russia's shelters from the Black Sea. You have the military traffic. You have all kind of landmines and stuff there that has flown from Kakhovka. You have mines like sea mines. It's not doing well, the Black Sea. It wasn't doing well before that, but it's doing even worse, like everything else. And there were reports of the increased number of deaths of dolphins and porpoises, cetaceans. We don't know yet why. There are different scenarios, like the different reasons. Could be virus, could be sonoric damage. The scientists don't give an answer. There are all kind of speculation, and sometimes the numbers are exaggerated. But the fact is that they're dying and that they're found on the shores. So you don't almost have access to the Black Sea shores nowadays. That's how you have some, but the places, even environmentalists don't have access to the sea because it's an area of control of borders. So it's, even for the scholars, it's very hard to actually go and look at it. But in one nature reserve down from Odessa, down in the Black Sea, when they used to have access, and they didn't afterwards. But I like to tell the story of discovering this dolphin because Ecocide is an title, and we have Monica here, Monica. But Ecocide is surrounded by this legal discourse, right? And usually when you hear about Ecocide in this nice environments like this, and people wear suits and they debate all this legal aspect. I actually like to tell the story of the labor of Ecocide to documentation, which happens exactly in this kind of nature reserves when the body of the dolphin is discovered. So what happens in this nature reserve? The border guard discovers the body of the dolphin, and he calls the nature reserve and says, like, "Hey, like you located this body, will you come pick it up?" And in this nature reserve, in the beginning of 2022, the situation changed, but they didn't have any cars because the cars, or maybe they had some cars, but you got a lot of cars were donated to the military effort, but also they are by the Black Sea, most of sand dunes, the cars don't go to a lot of places, just you can't drive there. And so they're like, okay, we have this border, it's 30 kilometers, which is what, 25?
Yeah, miles, a little bit less.
It's August, the end of August in Ukraine, which feels like this, like outside here, like you're fully baked when you're outside. It's like dry, open area, no shade, no trees, nothing. And they need to pick up this body of the dolphin, and they get a donkey called Yasha, and they get two environmental employees who take it back, they take it back and put like a body bag for the dolphin. And then like the cart.
Oh, the buggy, yeah. They say that, the donkey cart.
A donkey cart. And with the donkey cart, they go for like, a decent amount of time to the shore. And at some point, this donkey stops because it doesn't want to walk through the sand, probably or tired, it's hot. And the two men keep walking, looking for the body of the dolphin. They locate the body of the dolphin, and the dolphin's kind of the size of the human body, right? It's big as us. And they drag, and it's heavy. It's heavy. And it's probably also, you can imagine, it smells, and everything. But they drag this body through the water towards the donkey and the buggy, and they bring it and they put it on this buggy, and they start heading back into the direction of the nature reserve. And the reason they do it because Ukraine prosecutes ecocide and it documents it, but for that you have to have evidence.
So
And
this is a legal act. They're gathering evidence in case there's ever a war crimes trial for the crime of ecocide. And this dead dolphin that's an endangered species is evidence in an imagined future case against the perpetrators of ecocide.
it's just
So these guys are putting out this, this has become evidence. And these people are so determined to gather this evidence that they've traveled all this way, donkey foot, then they pull the dolphin back through the water to get it to the donkey cart.
And they bring they put the dolphin on the wagon and they start moving back to the nature reserve. And because it's Ukraine and funding for environment, funding for environmental initiatives is never good in any country in the world. I think, right? It's never prioritized, but in Ukraine it was particularly dire. The two most underfunded areas, like everywhere else, is culture and environment. In Ukraine, most of the culture or the environmental budget went towards maintaining Chernobyl. Of course. Anyway, so nature reserves never had any kind of significant money, and the dolphin has to be stored in a fridge or in a freezer. The nature reserve doesn't have it. What they do is they negotiate with the local commercial fishermen that the fisherman can keep the body until the person who conducts autopsies arrives from Kyiv, which is a night train. It's around 600 miles or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So until this person from Kyiv arrives, can actually perform the autopsy for the evidence. And bless this fisherman who agrees to store the body, but because it's Ukraine and infrastructure is shelled all the time, Russia bombs, there is no electricity for hours. The body of the dolphin in the freezer stinks, and the commercial fisherman says, "I'm sorry, guys, but all my produce is getting destroyed." So what he does, he throws away the dolphin to the landfill. He calls the nature reserve, says, "Sorry, I had to remove the dolphin, it's on the landfill now." The guys in the reserve take the donkey, take the lion, like this story is ending. And they go to the landfill to try to locate the body of the dolphin because people from Kyiv are coming and they need to collect this evidence. And because the dolphin stayed there for a couple of hours, the dogs have eaten it already. I mean, it's crazy. The landfill smells, and it's August. You can imagine being in a landfill, and they go through it to locate the body of the dolphin. Like, okay, what do we have? Like, what do we do with it? And eventually they place it in kind of salty part of the Black Sea, the saltiest, so it goes back to the water waiting for the people in Kyiv. And when the autopsy is conducted,
and they do conduct the autopsy on the dolphin.
When the researcher arrives from marine biologist arrives. And then the evidence, because Ukraine doesn't have labs, goes either to Germany or Italy. And then the story continues. Maybe we will eventually know that. But when I was told the story first, and also read it in a book by the researcher at the Nature Reserve, I mean, it just struck me because the labor, this kind of sweaty, emotional labor as well. I mean, I can't even imagine, dragging a dead dolphin. I mean, it's just there's something really haunting about the dolphin being the size of a human. I think, and even there's some images of the dolphin autopsies that I was showing Monica, and they really look like in body bags, like human bodies. And of course, with in Ukraine, it's your first association, it's human bodies. And the kind of labor that is done by these people on the ground, and who are also just like they live like their lives are quite deprived, also financially, and they're endangered every day, and also and whenever I talk about environment, I mean, I want all the dolphins to be safe, but I also want the environment to be safe because they're the people who really do this work. And I think there's something very specific about environments that I learned that you can bring a surgeon from Brussels to Ukraine and they will do well, but you cannot bring an ornithologist because you have to be trained in a specific area. And you cannot train an ornithologist in 2 months or even a year. It's years and years of knowledge of being in the field. And when we talk about recovery and future, I always ask, what are the people going to do it? Yeah.
So maybe with that, we can turn to questions.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. First of all, who needs to read your book? What leader?
This is for people online.
I have two questions.
Yes.
Who needs to read your book? What leaders need to read it, and hopefully they'll act on it? But secondly, while the environment is critical, the death of so many citizens from Russia, obviously from Ukraine and other countries, has not changed anything. How do you see the impact from the environment changing that, or do you hope it will? Yes.
It's a great question of who needs to read it. I mean, I can say when I was writing it, I really, of course the answer is everybody, but I really hope to have conversation with people who are engaged in any kind of environmental struggle, activism, knowledge making, but might not know about Ukraine, because one big part also for me of learning about other places, and it's very sad learning as well, about the environmental destruction in Lebanon. There's a great book by Munira Hayat, The Landscape of War, about DMZ and North and South Korea, about the impacts of American bombs in Laos, and the industry of upcycling and recycling the unexploded ordnance. Reading some of these accounts is like kind of twisted look into the future for Ukraine, right? But my hope would be that people who are interested in these questions also get to discover Ukraine in a sense. For the people who already know about Ukraine, start to think of Ukraine from a different angle, perhaps. But the best audiences, I think, sometimes is the unexpected ones, right? It's the conversations that you get, and you're like, okay. In terms of environment, it's a really great question. So Monica can speak to it more, but Ukraine is really leading the legal struggle for recognizing ecocide as an international crime. Among Vanuatu is another state which is very involved, and then of course Stop Ecocide International is the initiative. So there's an important contribution in many ways. For other places, hopefully would, in many ways, like even if Kakhovka, like it will not, like what I understood that Kakhovka will not, like there's no way that it can actually go through, like be accounted for, but it can work at least in preventing maybe some other future stuff, So that is, I think, important. And why is it important? Like strangely, it's going back to, it's because people talk about this. It matters to people there. These are the people who are displaced who told me about that. And one of the times, I think I have it in the book, I was crossing back to Ukraine from Poland on a train. I don't go around and be like, hi, I'm an environmental, so like I just sit there. And people talking in the train compartments, there's no one on that train. And people talk, and one of these women, she just starts talking about this endangered species affected by Kakhovka.
By Kakhovka, we mean the
The
dam
dam.
that got exploded.
And flooded.
2 years ago, right?
2023,
Yeah.
on the 6th of June.
Yeah. So Russia bombed a giant. Russia bombed a giant dam that was part of a hydroelectric installation. So
in Europe,
if you could imagine a dam across the Mississippi River that was containing this huge amount of water, I haven't done a comparison, so don't take this to the bank, but think of it in terms of the Lake of the Ozarks. So a dam gets exploded, and then and that's the Kakhovka Dam. So the dam is exploded, and then there's flooding in which people lost their lives, and also habitats are destroyed, and farm animals are destroyed, and deer are found floating 100 miles away. So in any case, so we're talking about Kakhovka.
Yeah.
That's the dam.
And the woman talks about this particular blind mole rat species that also nobody knew about, but she's like, I really worry about that, and so these are people who are not necessarily environmental activists, but they talk about it, or like the soldier, right, who says, so I would say it matters because it matters to the people, which is not an argument for everybody. But also the other thing, thinking of environments don't stop at national borders, and all the environmental things travel. I'd like to give an example from the book by Kate Brown, Manual for Survival on Chernobyl, which is just incredible read. If you haven't read, I love that book. But she tracks, Chernobyl is radioactively contaminated a lot of land, and radiation persists in many places, not only in Ukraine and Russia and Belarus as well, and beyond to Bavaria. But there is berry picking practices, and a lot of berries get exported. and a lot of frozen berries that then travel to North America, not a lot, some frozen berries could actually come from Chernobyl. And what she does, she tracks the truck that carries the berries that are radioactive, and is stopped on the U.S.-Canadian border and is searched. And they think like, what is kind of weapons? And then they open these berries. But the point that she's making that Chernobyl might be really far, but actually it also arrives to breakfast tables here, and the same with anything Ukrainian or in any other place. Yeah. Thank you.
There's a question online from one of our viewers, Maria. She says, thank you for this presentation. Maybe you can say something about the future healing of the land and nature in Ukraine after the war. How long will it take to heal?
I mean, I guess from the honest answer that is like never. Really. Yeah, I think, and then just the war in general. I think there are different levels, of course, but there's in a kind of symbolic and metaphysical, but also material way. It never ends. Even if the fight stops on the ground, there will be landmines. There will be. I mean, there's going to be. There's a huge amount of trauma. It will last, forever. So I don't really know. I guess it's the question of how do we understand healing, and it's gonna, I guess, heal in some places, and there will be new things that emerge. It's already healing in some places, and there's things that are happening, but we probably, this is it. We are with it for the rest of at least our lives, and maybe more into the future.
So Darya in the book talks about landmines. Ukraine is now the most mined country.
One of the most.
One of the
But
most
we don't know
mined.
about Afghanistan, I think, in our price statistics.
So, right,
Yeah.
and the Suffering Olympics also is not a winning game, but Ukraine is one of the most mined countries in the world, and the landmines are not the only problem. In the places where that have been extensively bombed, there's so much bombing, and if you can imagine Minnesota, Iowa, Kansas, like the best farmland in America, just being bombed, the heavy metal traces that are left. And the way that at least the only way that I know, I'm not a specialist in this, but the way that I know that you mitigate like topsoil contamination in a brownfield is you remove the topsoil, but Ukraine has some of the best topsoil in the world. So the last thing you want to do is remove the topsoil. But if it's contaminated with heavy metals, then what's the future of farming there, even if it's demined? So again, for the rest of our lives, we'll see.
I guess, the future, though, we know in a way that people will continue living there and will continue to farm, and they will return to those lands. So if you think of healing in that sense, and I think that is something, when we think of war areas, we think of them as like completely deprived people, which is absolutely not true. And I mean, they're populated by like marble polecats, by like everything you imagine, and people, and they continue living there. And that's something I'm really struggling like to find language and articulate. What does that living in those spaces mean, right? Because we tend to sometimes romanticize it as resistance, and there is parts of it, but there is also some kind of there's something very sad about that, because people don't have anywhere to go, and they don't, and even if they hypothetically have somewhere to go, but they can't imagine those conditions. Anyway, so it's but we definitely know there will be life, and it's already there. People live in the most unthinkable circumstances, and they keep going about their lives. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm engineer, so like in these days, when you open your cell phone, very often you have problem related to software, not hardware.
Mm.
So if you look this way, hardware is like more like nature. Software is more human-made.
Mm.
So if you look on the environment in Ukraine, what's happened right now related to war, it's software or human-made disaster.
Mm.
It's not nature-made, like open destroys. So my question is, what do you think? Maybe our human Windows needs to be upgraded?
Oh, there's definitely. but also I think there's this argument that there are no natural disasters. No, right? That all disasters could be mitigated in a certain way through construction. Like not mitigated, but sometimes. I mean, you can answer more.
Prevented.
Prevented.
Or recovery. nutrition.
having better shelters, right? Sometimes when you call something natural disaster, it's kind of to actually shift the blame, or like to say that we're not responsible for it.
Yeah.
I think it's used in discourse at least today, no? And you know it more from St. Louis than me.
Right. Well, we've been talking about St. Louis and the natural disaster here, right? So the tornado that was not man-made that day, but the force of the tornado and the duration and the width is different than it was in the past. And so in that respect, in the long duration, there's something man-made about this tornado. And then the disaster part of the tornado hitting, what is it that made this, why did some parts of the city suffer in different ways and other parts that were also hit by the tornado suffer in different ways? There's those parts are, even the natural disaster has something that looks like the hardware has a software component, right?
Yeah, that interconnected. I don't think you can separate. But it's true that humans have been. I mean, and in the book I write about it. I don't use and I don't like the category of invasive species because it projects a military vocabulary on something we don't fully sometimes even understand how it acts in ecosystems. But there's only one invasive species, and it's us humans. For the environment. Though of course not all humans. I mean, certain societies live differently, and not all parts of the world. But in many ways, yeah, you're definitely right. Yeah.
I don't want to keep people over, and I know some people will want to talk with Darya or have her sign a book that you may get. But I just wanted to ask for you to give the last word. So the title of the book is Ecocide, but the last part is very touching to me. The last little part is called Lifelines. So could you talk about lifelines?
Well, I can read. Actually, maybe this is not full circle. Yeah, I mean, yeah, good question. So it actually kind of continues from the question about engineering in it's an infrastructural question. I mean, but thinking of what holds people and not only people together in this moment of profound pain, but so to what do we hold on to, right, in these moments? But I also kind of was thinking of infrastructural lifelines, the electricity lines, and when since I deoccupied again, the first thing that people do in those villages is put the electricity back, connect them to electricity, and the people who go there, electricians, but often also the people who step on mines, because they mine. And so what does it actually mean to restore this life, but to restore these communities? And the last chapter is on energy, which is something that was requested by the publisher because there's a lot of interest in Ukrainian energy. And I felt very animated from it. I could write about plants, but I was like, it's not about energy. But then, when I got to write it, actually it's my favorite chapter, weirdly. It always happens like this. But I thought a lot about infrastructure, and Ukraine has, of course, huge infrastructures everywhere. It's part of the Soviet modernization, and not only. And I was writing it, so I was finishing it in spring 2023 when there were massive attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure. And I remember even looking up statistics of how many things were destroyed, and you have one number in the evening, you wake up, and there's another number that you have to change because Russia really targets the infrastructure, which is a lifeline for people. And I especially think when we think about infrastructure and water and heating and electricity, Russia already does it and bombs civilians, but the people who are most at risk during the infrastructural destruction are people with disabilities, elderly, children. It really is an attack on the most vulnerable in the community because and people who cannot evacuate. And anyway, and so I was watching the news 24/7, and I was looking at all these updates, and at some point I see, shall I read it? Yeah, I can just read it. So this chapter was mostly written and finished in March 2024 as Russia was incessantly targeting Ukrainian infrastructure. I spent that month in Bucharest, so I was in Romania, so down below from Ukraine, on a fellowship finishing this. But I was still waking up at night to monitor the chats reporting on missiles and drones over Ukraine. During the day, the TV was almost always on, showing footage of bombed and burning buildings, rescue workers trying to save people, and energy workers trying to fix the damage. At some point, I spotted energy workers engaged in an unexpected activity. They were filmed standing on the platform of a crane above the power lines, fixing a stork's nest. The old nest had fallen, and the residents of Novomoskovsk in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast had called the energy workers asking for help. In response to the request, the workers constructed a special metal device to attach the nest to the electricity pole, hoping for the return of the birds. And it was such an image when I saw it, because I was like, oh, they're fixing another damage. And I saw these birds, and it's kind of absurd, but also hopeful. And the people in this like day and age, they would be like, yes, come and help. And the guys would be like, yeah, we'll come and help, you know, and it was, yeah, and it's really, it kind of summarized for me this feeling of Ukraine. And one thing maybe just to end with, this image that you guys about that, like the strange part, and Ukraine is one of those places, there are many places in the world, unfortunately, sadly, but the places that are at an existential risk, you feel life in them like nowhere else. You go to Ukraine, and like, it's just a different feeling, you know, because you don't know if you're going to wake up tomorrow, and it's one of the most alive places for me. I mean, there are other places in the world, it's a place I know, and it's really hard to explain because it's both this tremendous grief, what happens, but grief is, of course, the other side of love, right? You really feel intensely. Like, I don't know how to express this feeling, but it's the most kind of striking characteristic of being in Ukraine for me today. It's, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you again. Thank you, Darya, for this wonderful talk.
I just wanted to give a comment related to plants. Yes, I just wanted to give a comment related to plants. How plants can be instrumental in detoxifying the land from the heavy metals.
Yes.
I did a quick Google, and it said yes, there are mushroom and other fungal species that thrive in heavy metal contaminated soil by developing advanced resistance and detoxification mechanisms. So
They're much smarter than us. No, totally, and they are, and that's why I don't like the term. Sorry, don't get me started. I don't like the term invasive species because remediation in terms of coal mines and other disturbed areas. I know from coal mine research that people have done. They bring introduced species, vulnerable species, that then help to pull out all this stuff from the land, right? So, like, how, like, invasive is not, it's a kind of, it doesn't really represent the relationship that people have with some of the plants, and I think it's very military to project. But yeah, that's what people are looking at, is how we can mediate, right? And yeah, you're right, mushrooms are they're doing the job for us. The poor mushrooms, you know? I'm like, yeah.
Wonderful. Give it up one last time to Darya. We're signing books up here in just a moment. I'm going to bring up a better to sign books on. We got them for sale up at the front desk, so please buy with yourself, by your friends. Yeah, thank you all again for coming. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Andy, yes.
And Alvin is here. In the most amazing outfit. You're like,